Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 7th of March 2015. My name is Total Biscuit with today's gaming news and comment. Coming up in the show, the Steam universe. Everything about Valve VR, as well as Steam machines, Steam Link, and more. All this in the OC Remix track of the day is coming your way right about now. Valve has officially unveiled what they are branding the Steam Universe, which is a set of 4 different devices designed supposedly to expand PC gaming. They are looking at a release date of November for most of this technology, and of course one of the biggest announcements as part of this was the Steam VR, aka the HTC Vive, the virtual reality collaboration between the mobile phone company HTC and Valve itself. Alongside this, the Steam universe includes the Steam controller, which has now apparently reached what could be considered its final form, the Steam Link, which is essentially an extender allowing you to stream your PC games to a television, and various Steam machines, which are now actually listed on Steam, and prices and specs have been given. So let's talk through what the Steam universe actually means at this point and what all of this is actually all about. So I suppose we should start with the big elephant in the room, which is of course the Steam VR announcement and what that actually means. So this thing is looking interesting, extremely advanced certainly, and they're looking to develop what they call 360 room scale VR, which is something that is somewhat designed for the use of a room space as opposed to just sitting down. Now I imagine of course that sitting down is going to be absolutely fine for certain games. However, the current concern seems to be that the system is very much designed around the idea that you have a room to move around in, or some kind of omnidirectional treadmill. The Vive uses base stations which project points all over the room, and it also detects your movement relative to that. The system is called Lighthouse, and according to Tested.com, it sends laser sweeps throughout the room to detect where you are relative to everything else. The system will set up a virtual grid which lets you know when you're going to run into a wall or anything along those lines. Now, this seems to me that this is a solution to so-called VR motion sickness, which is a problem that many people experience simply because they're moving within the game and they're not moving in real life. So there's a disconnect there. I did experience a small amount of it with the Oculus Rift HD prototype that I tried at PAX, I believe last year. That said, I am also prone to motion sickness. I get car sick on a regular basis, and I have simulation sickness from field of view. So both of those are a problem. Plus, it was a prototype, and I wear glasses, which means that the prototype was not necessarily properly configured for my vision. So there are problems there. I imagine that the system would work very well with anything that's cockpit-based, so racing games or flight simulators, where you're supposed to be sitting still, and that's absolutely fine. But this room-based solution, while it seems really interesting, is something that worries me just a little bit, and I wonder if it's actually required to play things like first-person shooters. Like, is that really going to be a problem, and is this the best solution for it? Because for a PC gamer, certainly, dedicating an entire room to VR seems somewhat excessive. I can't think of a room in my house that I could use, and I have a pretty big house. I mean, I could use my living room, like have the media room, but that's got recliners, and it's got the surround sound system in it, and the television. I mean, I'm not going to run around that and risk running into things. That doesn't seem like a particularly good idea. So while this is an interesting solution, I think it would definitely work well in places that were properly set up for it. I could see arcades putting a space together for that. I could actually see laser tag arenas maybe retooling to use VR. That would actually be fantastic. Big open spaces that are properly designed for that sort of thing. I am somewhat worried about the consumer applications of it and whether or not it would be very limited as to what games you could properly play on it without dedicating a room to be able to move around in. I'm still kind of excited about it, don't get me wrong. I mean, I think that it adds a net positive to cockpit-based gaming like racing and flight simulators. I can't see why you wouldn't want that level of immersion, and I think that it can be done with things like first-person shooters as well. But it seems that Valve has found a solution to the problem, which has then created another problem, which is just how viable this actually is within a consumer household. I mean, there's already issues with the Kinect, for God's sake, and that's not even as extreme as this. I mean, you're talking about wandering around a room with something on your face that prevents you from seeing where you're going. That is potentially a huge problem, I think. So I hope they continue to work on solutions, maybe involving changing UIs in order to try and reduce the motion sickness effect. I think that if you give particular reference points on the screen and you design it in such a way that it's supposed to be positioned naturally, and you do things like redesign the character models to ensure that the gun is in a logical place and that the gun actually moves relative to your head, then you're probably going to be able to reduce a lot of that motion sickness effect. So a lot of that's actually going to come down to game designers and not down to HTC and Valve themselves. Don't get me wrong, though. It's still a very, very interesting piece of technology, and I'm very interested in playing around with it. Now, let's move on to Steam machines. So, Steam machines so far have been a bit of a mess. I mean, these things were announced a long time ago, and we didn't see hide nor hair of them for ages. There was the XR3 Piston that popped out that wasn't a Steam machine, but was clearly claiming to be. And now we have a list of the things. And it's not a very promising list, I've got to say. There are a lot of very expensive machines on this that wildly vary in price, and they don't have any real way for a casual consumer to determine whether or not they're any good. So if we start with the Alienware Steam machine, it starts at $479.99, and it doesn't even tell you exactly what the graphics card is. It's a GTX 2GB GDDR5 graphics card. We don't know what that is. From what I've heard, it's supposed to be a retooled custom 860M, which actually is powerful enough to keep up with next-gen consoles. In fact, it slightly surpasses them in power. So, value-wise, this is probably not terrible. I think the i3 is perhaps a little bit underpowered, and it's going to struggle a little bit when DirectX 12 comes along, which supposedly makes multi-threading a great deal easier. I think if you were to get the i5 version, you're probably in a pretty good spot. And at $479.99, it's relatively competitive. I'd say it's not a terrible machine, honestly. The form factor is nice. It's got the USB where it's supposed to be, although apparently it has interface problems that make it almost impossible to install anything outside of Steam unless you plug in a keyboard and mouse. So that doesn't sound like a particularly good idea. You can get several kinds of them. There are actually 4 variants. For some reason, the Alienware Steam Machine A and B are almost identical. One has 4 gigs of RAM, one has 8. And then C has an i5 and D has an i7, but they all have the same GPU. So buying the i7 variant is a particularly bad idea because you're going to be horribly bottlenecked by the GPU. And since it's a mobile GPU, it's going to be very difficult to replace, if not impossible. So there are some possibilities with that one. Just because the base machine is relatively powerful, it can compete with a PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and it's not too expensive. But then you move on to some of the others, and they're just ridiculous. The alternate Steam machine, $1,100. It's got an i3 4130 in it and a 750 Ti. It's a complete and total ripoff. There's no doubt about it. You can build that machine for about $500 yourself. So for half the price, less than half the price, it only has 8 gigs of RAM and a 500 meg hard drive. It's not even an SSD, it's an SSHD, which is the hybrid drive. Just a joke. If you go up to their top rated one, $1,900 gets you an i5 and a 980. Jesus. I mean, again, you could build that for half that price. And this is where a lot of the Steam machines are running into problems. Some of them are reasonably spec'd for what they do, and some of them have nice form factors. The Zotac machine is quite nice. You're looking at a modern Intel CPU and a 970, which is good enough to run anything better than a next-gen console. It's got 8 gigs of RAM in it, which is enough. It's got a 1TB hard drive and a 64 gig SSD, which is enough for the operating system, so you're getting that fast booting experience. I'd like to say that that's very much like a console, but actually, I've been booting my consoles recently, and they're freaking slow. So no, apparently not. So, I mean, that's a nice machine, but you're still talking about a $1,000 machine. So you're saying, well, you can get this or 2 Xbox Ones. Now, the problem that I have with all of this is there's a lot of choice. It's very confusing. The prices are all over the damn place. And more to the point, for a casual consumer, none of this tells me anything. I mean, God, the Brix Pro, the Gigabyte Brix Pro, is a $600 machine. You think, oh, it's pretty reasonable. It's ludicrously underpowered. It has an i7 in it, but it only has Intel Iris Pro graphics. So it doesn't have a proper GPU, but it has an i7, which doesn't compensate for that whatsoever. This is horribly confusing to any of the more casual consumers, and that is the target demographic. Yes, you may buy a Steam machine if you're a PC gamer, if you really, really want to buy another sort of micro PC for your living room. But you could easily build one for your living room unless you are vastly lacking in space. So that isn't particularly suitable. And then you look at all of these specs and you look at just the confusing range of hardware available and the price variance anywhere between $450 to $5,000 for the top level Falcon Northwest Tiki. I'm pretty sure I said this the last time I talked about Steam machines, but I'm going to reiterate it because it's a damn good idea and you should probably listen to it. Here's what needs to be done in terms of standardization. If you're going to do vastly varying hardware in this way, and you're going to have like 10 plus different manufacturers, you need something which ties them all together other than being listed on a Steam page. You need to create a unified rating system that tells people exactly what the machines are capable of doing. And the way that I would do this is to rate it via benchmark, and then take those benchmarks and then boil them down into numbers that are actually useful. So you could have various grades of Steam Machine based on what people actually want. The way that you can do this is fairly simple, and you take 3 factors into account. 1, graphics preset levels. These are things that people very easily understand. Low, medium, high, ultra. They are not specific, but they're good enough. They're easy enough for people to understand. 2, frame rate. With modern HDMI and DisplayPort, you can go above 60 frames per second. So really, you're looking at 3 values: 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second, and post 60. So you're looking at about 120 or something along those lines. So those are the 3 main frame rates you want to be looking at. I want to know what these Steam machines are capable of. And 3, resolution. And these 3 things tie together because we need to know what resolution you can run all of these things at. Because, of course, a machine is going to be capable of 60 at a lower resolution, but not necessarily at a higher one. So what you need to do is take those 3 values and quantify them into a rating system, which makes it obvious what the machine is actually capable of, and then benchmark it against popular titles so people know what they're talking about, and constantly update those benchmarks. The nice thing about the Steam machines is that they have preset specs, meaning that benchmarks are going to be useful information that lasts a while, and they're going to be accurate because you know what the hardware is, whereas with other benchmarks, you're often guessing relative to what the benchmark's actual machine is. With this, you can literally benchmark the machine, say, all right, Alienware Steam machine, model A. Well, let's go for the basic model here. So you've got your values, and you've got various games. So Battlefield Hardline, for instance. You can run this at 30 frames per second at this resolution on these presets. And you could go through these various games, you could have various benchmarks depending on presets and frame rates and so on and so forth, boil them down to some nice numbers, make everything relative and easy to understand, visual, and there you have it. That would be how I would do Steam machines. As it stands, this Steam machine page is completely useless, and I certainly hope that they work greatly towards boiling this down to values that are easily understood, as opposed to prices and a ludicrous list of hardware which varies wildly and in many cases, especially with the Alienware Alpha, is not properly described at all. So you don't even know what the machine's capable of doing. Yeah, if you don't do that, I can't see Steam machines being all that successful, frankly. Maybe you sell some alphas here and there because they're pretty affordable, but outside of that, you're not going to find people that are going to be buying Steam machines instead of buying their own machines, or even just a custom built, just buy an Alienware instead of an Alpha, If you're going to buy a pre-built and you're set on Alienware, then buy an Alienware, because you're going to get more bang for your buck, most likely. Or from any other number of manufacturers, or buy a laptop. All of these are possibilities. So the Steam machines have a tough road to go, and I think that communication is the most important aspect of that. They need to be able to communicate the power of the system versus the power of comparable consoles on various easy-to-understand titles in a very visual way. And if they can't do that, then frankly, I don't see them working all that well. That said, you should also bear in mind the Steam machines are very much a vector for SteamOS, and they're trying to push it that way, but frankly, I don't see SteamOS getting wide adoption if Steam machines is the way they're going to push it. I think it perhaps needs to be the other way around. There needs to be wide-scale adoption before that happens, and I know that they're attempting to do that at the moment, but as it stands, SteamOS doesn't actually give you a performance boost, and more to the point, what happens when DirectX 12 comes out and we get Windows 10, which is supposedly going to vastly improve PC graphics performance? If SteamOS doesn't properly support those things, then it's going to be somewhat dead in the water. I mean, why would I use SteamOS right now? I wouldn't, because it's clearly not ready, and Windows is a better option, even Windows 7. So there are many mountains to climb in that regard. Now, moving on to something that's a little bit more positive, the Steam Link. This actually looks affordable and desirable for me. Now, supposedly, this thing, for $50, can stream 1080p 60 FPS gameplay. Now, whether or not it can actually do that over Wi-Fi is a different matter. It's not the only machine that can do this. You can do this with a Shield, but you've got to use an Ethernet adapter to do it. You can't do it over Wi-Fi. If Valve has managed to do 1080p 60, I mean, hell, actually, even 720p 60 is probably good enough for a lot of people, or maybe just a bit higher than that. There are other 16:9 resolutions that you could choose that aren't just 720p. If you can do that at 60 frames per second, you've got a sale from me. Because yes, there are times when I just like chill back, relax, all cool, shoot some b-ball outside of the school, and preferably play some of my Steam games on my bigger television, which is in the other room. And my Wi-Fi is pretty quick. I have a fairly good router, so my hope would be that I could push my Wi-Fi and actually get that kind of performance out of it with bare minimal latency. If that's true, especially since I'm running a 5 gigahertz network, which would hopefully be a little bit quicker, then fantastic. I mean, that's an affordable price tag for something along those lines. My concern is that you're gonna have to use the Steam controller with it, and I don't know if I'm gonna like this thing yet. These touchpads are looking a little strange. I know they have haptic feedback, but getting used to using those things might require some effort. I'm not sure if I actually can. I hope I like it. Certainly, it looks like an interesting controller, but it is a big change. And for fighting games in particular, I can't see myself wanting to use that instead of a proper D-pad. And as far as I know, the Steam Link doesn't have any connection ports whatsoever outside of an HDMI 1.4 to plug into your television. As a direct result, one has to wonder if the Steam controller is going to be the absolute only way that I'll be able to do things. Maybe my PC's close enough to get a Wi-Fi Direct to my PC. I don't think so, though. I mean, it's quite far away. I don't know if it would go through that many walls. So it looks like you're going to be tied to using the controller for that. But regardless, it's a really nice piece of kit. I've been looking for an extender for a while that will perform the way that I want to. And as of yet, I haven't found one. So it looks like the Steam Link is going to be the first. I know that the Shield comes close, and I know that I can get 60 FPS gameplay through it at 1080p if I actually use the Ethernet adapter, but that's not practical for me. So that's what I'm looking for. Can you do 1080p 60 over Wi-Fi? Is your encoding efficient enough? Is it bandwidth saving enough in order to do it? If so, awesome. Fantastic. We're in a great spot. I will love to be able to use my PC on my television with bare minimal effort. That'll be wonderful, and that's a thing that I will do. So this is a nice little device. And of course, I made my remarks about the controller. It's going to be an interesting transition, certainly. Again, as a fighting game player, I'm a little bit concerned about that D-pad thing. It does have one traditional stick, which is enough for some games, although not all of them, and I do like the dual-stage triggers. So I'll be interested to see if I can actually get used to it. I'd like to get my hands on this thing. And it looks like a lot of the stuff is going to be tied to using it, so with the Steam Link, I'm probably going to have to use that thing. Yeah, so overall, there's some interesting stuff going on with Valve. The Steam Link is the thing that excites me the most. The VR has potential, but obviously I think that the room limitations are going to cause problems, and Steam machines are just a mess right now, as far as I'm concerned. I really don't know what to think of what Steam machines is currently doing. It's like, finally, a multiple choice answer. No, there's already a multiple choice answer. People are confused by it. There needs to be less choice rather than more, or you need to give a way to properly explain to consumers what exactly these machines are capable of in a simple and visual format. Do that. It needs a Steam hardware rating system. Alright folks, that's me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the content patch. Before I go, I'd like, of course, to give you the OC Remix track of the day. There's a brand new album that is absolutely phenomenal over on ocremix.org. It is so damn good. It's a 7-track free album of cello music called 7 Songs for 7th Saga by Sebastian Frage. And I'm going to play you a track from that album. It is so very good. I really hope that you enjoy it as much as I do. Hell, the download even comes with the sheet music if you actually want to play this. This album contains 7 interpretations of Norihiko Yamanuki's original soundtrack for the Super Nintendo role-playing game, The 7th Saga. I'm going to play you the first track from the album. It goes by the name of Wind. You can download it in the description below this video, folks, and I'll see you next time.